Hey Aseem, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you, Natraj. Thanks for having me. Excited to be on and great to talk to you.
I wanted to have you on the podcast. You did a couple of interesting things. I think you had a great career at Microsoft, and now you're working at Madrona, which is one of the premier venture firms here in Seattle. So I want to talk about all those things, but before that, just to give an introduction to the audience, can you talk a little bit about your upbringing and what you did before Microsoft?
Yeah, I grew up mostly in Mumbai, along with millions of my neighbors, a small city, as we all know. And I then, got my bachelor's in engineering in a institute called VIT, which is based in Pune. It's about, 3 hours from Mumbai. And then, post that, was looking for a post-grad sort of opportunity and was really interested in the world of computer networks. And, came over here to the University of Washington, to sort of pursue my master's in electrical engineering with a specific focus on networking. Came here as a grad student, did research, was an RA at the Applied Physics Labs. Believe it or not, I was looking at the application of electrical engineering to, a space like oceanography. That was kind of my research, so it was kind of fun. And then interned at Microsoft the following year in the Windows group, writing deep installer level code. And then came back to Microsoft as given I had a full-time offer and just joined the team and sort of stayed there. So that's kind of my background in a nutshell.
You had pretty interesting career at Microsoft itself. So can you talk a little bit about and you ended up at some point also sort of playing a CEO role for Azure, right? So talk to a little bit about what are those early stages of working at Microsoft was, I mean, starting from intern to becoming I think a GM at Azure.
Yeah, it was really a wild ride, to be honest. I joined the company as an intern, and joined the Windows division, which at the time was the biggest division, and my eyes were kind of just glazing over with like the amount of talent and the expertise that people had already built in the operating system world. And so I joined them. I interned as a developer, wrote deep installer level code, but joined back as a PM. Worked on, migration features where you were migrating settings across the OS, was was fortunate enough to have a killer team and work on a killer team and learn so much about, depth experts. But then, with any big company, I was always curious on, learning as much as I can and optimizing for breadth. And, when you're an intern, when you come back right from college, your first job, you don't really know what you want to do in the fullness of time. And for me, the biggest focus area was I just wanted to learn. I just want to seep it up. I just want to soak it up. And so after being a PM for a few years, I would interact with all these product managers. I'm like, wow, these product managers do a really killer job, and they understand what to go build. Like I want to go learn that. So pivoted to being a product manager, joined the Windows Marketplace team, working with ISVs, spent a few years as a product manager, then got working with, a lot of these go-to-market folks, and, they were looking at doing developer marketing, got offered a job to sort of run marketing, ran marketing for a bit. Similar pattern followed. I got interested in the sales, went to OEM sales. Prior to that, ran the incubation project for commerce and online payments that then became Office 365 backbone. So did that for a bit, then went to sales, ran sales for 4 years. And in the blink of an eye, over the first 10 years, I kind of did every role from development to sales and everything in between. And that was a phenomenal experience, got a breadth of role. And right when, Microsoft got into the cloud and, sort of doubled down on the cloud, went and joined the cloud team. And that's kind of where, I was at for the last 8 years at Microsoft, grew the Azure business, insane growth, doubling every year, just a fantastic growth engine for the company. So, in retrospect, if I told you that I planned it this way, I'd be lying. I think it was all my interest towards, having and getting different skill sets that sort of led me to this path.
Because I mean, there are two ways to think about careers. Like some people focus on just doing one thing and like compound it over the years, and you get really better at it. Like you see that sort of personas, and what you are telling me is like you are interested in more things, so you went sort of exploring different job roles also, right? So
Yeah, I
was
mean,
that
look at
conscious, or like did you think about that as a career tactic, or?
I mean, look, there are really two ways, like you mentioned, right? And there is somewhere in between as well, right? Like people spend significant amount of time gaining one set of skill sets and domain expertise and then do something else. Look, I always indexed on learning, and I was always a breadth guy. I love doing a lot of different things. Somewhere along the lines, I went and pursued my business school degree, again from the University of Washington, going to school in the evenings. And that really helped me think through the fullness of experiences required to go run a business. That was what I was interested in. I don't think that there is a silver bullet to say, hey, one is better than the other. I mean, there are hybrid models as well. And so it was really at that moment decision for me versus sort of something I planned for. Right now, when I look back, yes, I've always been a person who collects different experiences, like different challenges. Wants to go do different roles, and that theme has sort of stayed with me through my career. I don't think, like I said, I didn't plan it. I didn't have a course. I didn't have a path that was sort of linear to a certain extent. I took a fairly non-linear path, but there are people who spend their entire career doing product, and that's amazing because you do need these depth experts.
So at what point, so you were working at Azure, and at what point, like you said, decided, I'm assuming like it's a pretty interesting role. You decided, okay, I think this is time and I should go and do something else.
Yeah, look, I mean, the first eight years of Azure were just a rocket ship, right? Like, we were growing the business, we were doubling every year. There was a different level of scale. Like, the uh, just to give you an example, we spend billions of dollars every year just building out data centers. Like, how many companies can do that, right? You were growing sales, you were building the product, you were building a go-to-market team, you were expanding product and programs. You were buying and acquiring companies. I mean, I think during my time, I think we probably did like north of 10 acquisitions. So there was a lot of organic as well as inorganic growth that kind of got done or completed within the Azure team. And it was Microsoft's fastest growing business at that time, and it was just fun to sort of be a part of that. And then, post Azure, I think when Azure was a massive business, the Microsoft machine kicked in, right? Like, Microsoft knows how to execute and run big businesses. And it got to the point where I started on the Azure team when it was a speedboat, to give you an analogy, and then it became a cruise ship, right? A big Dreamliner, kind of, I would say, a big vessel that takes a lot of inertia to sort of move. I mean, it's still nimble, but you make very few fast-paced decisions. And I enjoyed the ride tremendously, but then I was on to seeking new adventures. One of the things I realized is I had all these experiences from development to sales and every function, and I thought of like, how do I take that and how do I help create net new businesses? And venture was sort of the obvious choice, helping founders and entrepreneurs and sit with them side by side and build these big businesses.
So were you, before like joining Madrona officially, were you doing angel investments, or like was there any interest before like officially moving into that role?
Yeah, I mean, look, I always considered angel investing. I think one of the challenges that I had to face was I was working in a platform business, right? And so I was pretty careful in not wanting to sort of go full steam on angel and invest in something that could be conflicting, or something that would put me in an awkward position. And so I did not invest a whole lot, but I always had this eye of like, or willingness to sort of go help startups, smaller companies in whatever shape or way I can, without actually while staying on the right side of the legalities, right? But it gave me an energy. I mean, I worked very closely with the Microsoft startups team, the accelerator team, the M12 guys back in the day on the venture fund side of things within Microsoft, and kind of help think through like, how do these businesses become successful by partnering with Microsoft. And so I always had an eye on the startup ecosystem. And so there was interest, there was willingness, and so venture seemed to me as a like very, very obvious next choice.
And how do you see like making decisions, like investing decisions, by being part of Madrona versus like, if you were in Azure and, you're thinking of a new line of product or business, and that's sort of like an investment, but it's a Microsoft scale investment, and you are sort of thinking through, and I see this at least myself, is like the decision making framework is slightly different, right? The impact is measuring, the impact is different. And while early stage startup, you pretty much have no data, you're flying blind in a lot of cases. Like, talk to me a little bit about like that decision framework, like, and Was it a challenging shift, or like how do you think about that, making those bets in general?
Yeah, in some ways there is similarities, and in some ways there is not a lot of commonality, right, in the decision-making process. From a similarities point of view, yeah, you look at market, you look at customer demand, you look at, what signal you're getting. And so all those things tend to be similar in terms of like how you would assess success, right? The areas that are dissimilar are worth calling out, right? One thing that you want to think of is when you're in a company like Microsoft and you're building products, like often you get the benefit of being in a bigger Microsoft in terms of funding. You get benefit being very close to the customer, co-developing. You get the benefit of people not questioning whether your company is going to exist or not. And you also get the benefit of investing from your P&L in a very thoughtful manner. But you also get, unnatural advantages or asymmetrical advantages, as I like to call it, right? You don't have to go hire a net new sales team. You don't have to go create net new partner programs. You can go latch on to existing assets that you already have as a big enterprise. On the Madrona side, if you look at working with startups, like founders don't have that, right? They're building everything from scratch. They're validating, ideating, staying close to the customer, building pricing models, creating programs, hiring salespeople, building great teams. Uh, you know, those are the kind of things that are different in some senses. Another huge differentiator that you think of it is talent, right? I mean, it's if you go back 6 months, like it was incredibly hard for startups to go hire great talent. It's just because I think the risk appetite is very different for an engineer to join a startup or to join a company like Microsoft, right? And so you have access to talent, you have access to a lot of these systems being in a company like Microsoft that you otherwise don't have as a founder. And so those things are some things that pose real risk to these companies that you have to evaluate through. But otherwise, if you think of it, like if you think of it as a CEO or an investment officer at both of these companies, or even as a VC, you are looking at, hey, what is my risk profile to make this successful or not? And so at the end of the day, all these things kind of go into that hopper of how do you make decisions, and you come out with the ultimate outcome of like that is grounded in how do you manage a risk and how do you make these things successful and what are gates. One of the things that I learned, I was very fortunate to learn at Microsoft, was the stage gating approach of how do you cross gates one time, one step at a time, and how do you de-risk your next growth engine activity. So there is definitely, like I said, richness of knowledge that I got at Microsoft that I then brought to the table here at Venture. And on the flip side, there is the venture world, which is very different from a scale and a scrappiness perspective early on that you just have to go embrace.
So right now, what are the areas that you are investing in? What stage are you investing in?
Yeah, so Madrona is a unique firm. We call ourselves as investors that work with founders on day one for the long run. So no check is too early for us. We start sometimes with an idea and a founder, and just work ourselves, sort of into this thesis and go build a company around it. There's plenty of examples of companies that have been built from day zero for us. And then more recently, we've also started investing in what we call as acceleration stage, where companies that have reached about 5 million in ARR. And so we tend to sort of go, Series B or early C, however you might want to call it. Our largest check tends to be about 20 million. So I think we're a unique firm when it comes to investing from zero to, let's say, the 20 million check. In terms of areas that I'm passionate about, I mean, look, my background is infrastructure. I did infrastructure at Azure. And so I invest in infrastructure, DevOps, security, sort of being beachhead areas within that space, as well as vertical SaaS. So I go all the way full stack. I look at like applications that are vertical centric as well. And then an area that I'm getting very, very excited and interested about in today's world is just this notion around like automation systems and robotics. And whether you call it low code, no code, whether you call it improvement on productivity, whether you call it robotic systems, that's one area that I'm pretty bullish on in terms of a thesis. And so we're getting there as a firm and building our thesis around what it might mean to sort of go invest in those areas.
Um, what do you think about the entire, like the AI hype cycle that's happening right now?
I actually think of it in two ways. One is it's a massive, massive enabler, right? Like if you think of it, like and you compare it to some of the earlier technologies that had promise but didn't quite cross the chasm, AI is slightly different, right? The applications are right in front of you, whether it is to write documents faster, or process images faster, or create images or videos. I think it's sort of given a boost to those scenarios, right? If you think of the work that Microsoft is doing, and I talked to Thomas recently around the GitHub Copilot approach, like that is fantastic, right? I mean, your productivity has gone up. Developers are not spending time on mundane tasks, but they're actually getting knowledge, and a co-pilot, like somebody looking over their shoulders and helping them. And so I think those scenarios are very real. Those applications of AI are just massive, right? I think Microsoft has done a massive or plays a huge role in this ecosystem, having worked with OpenAI to sort of go create this shot in the arm like approach, right? But ultimately, I think the question you have to ask yourself is, where does value get created, right? Like, how do companies in the vertical space kind of use AI to their advantage and create a moat around it? Because otherwise, it's just an API that's accessible to everybody. So I think it'll be interesting to see how the world evolves in this generative LLMs multimodal kind of way.
So I think you brought up I think what I wanted to ask next is uh, the moat, right? Everyone has this question of like, oh, where is the moat? Uh, because a lot of AI companies are, I mean, in a way, I mean, for lack of a better word, are wrappers around publicly available APIs. And Google is getting partnered with Anthropic. I think Amazon also partnered with Anthropic. Microsoft partnered with OpenAI, and we'll have Stability AI, which is like open source, and we are seeing Midjourney has its own API, which is like 10 people, right? So, I mean, if LLMs are commodity itself, where is the moat for companies? Are we going to look at like, Copy AI and Jasper AI are going to be like tools for copywriting and, writing better. Uh, but at the same time, you could argue that everyone who uses Outlook or Word are actually the distribution, channels where we're all writing already. So it makes sense whoever has the distribution access will probably win, right? You can look at it two ways, or probably both can win. I mean, it's
Yeah.
not like the market is small. So I'm
Yeah.
curious, like, what do you think about the moat challenges here for startups?
I mean, that is the question that most people are grappling with today, right? I mean, look, there is a reality around what you expressed around. Look, there's lots of things being done in lots of spaces that could be overlapping. And like if you take the example of copywriting or assisted writing, yes, there is Word, there's Google Docs, there's Google Sheets, there is Coda Docs, but and everybody's sort of innovating it in multiple ways, right? One of the things to think about as a differentiator factor is the enterprise data, and how do you use that data within the enterprise that is your data, it's proprietary, to make these models sharper, contextual, and more relevant, right? That gives you a competitive advantage. I think that's principle number one to sort of think about. Principle number two that you might want to think about is there a differentiated user experience that makes it so amazing that it's 10x better to sort of use these models or apply these models to on your day to day? And number three is, given the proliferation of these models, look, we believe that all these models are going to coexist, right? There is going to be value in all of these models, but who's the orchestrator? Like, who's the one sort of layer that is bringing the beauty of all these models together, or do I really have to pick and choose? Right. So I think those are three questions to sort of think about in terms of like, where does value get created, and how do you sort of win in a particular category? Now, of course, there's multiple of these scenarios, there's multiple use cases, and then there's going to be tailoring as well, right? Which is, what is a unique experience that Jasper or a Coda Docs or a Word is going to go build and enable for me that's differentiated than anybody else? And yes, you can always argue that people catch up, but there is a certain thing to be said about even first mover advantages in some of these categories.
Yeah, I think, uh, I mean, in all the sort of hype cycles, I think one thing you can always commonly bet on, because I mean, even I said in the last couple of sentences that LLMs are being commoditized, but it's not a straightforward thing that LLMs are commoditized, right? It didn't happen yet, right? It's not as commoditized as we think it is. Like there will be still, like, if you are looking at like AI talent in general, like that's a still non-commoditized thing. Like the talent itself is not a commodity yet, right? It's not easy to find someone who can like a 2% team who can train the LLM, who can deploy it and even deploy it or optimize it for a certain cost structure, right? That is still not commoditized.
Yeah, and I
Uh,
think there is a difference between training and inferencing as well, right?
yeah,
I think the training aspect of it is going to be expensive, right? I mean, imagine the number of GPUs I mean, you probably know better than anybody else being inside of Microsoft as to what's happening in the GPU space and the availability or the lack of availability of those things.
yeah,
And the second thing that I think we've got to keep in mind is the capital requirements around training these kind of things, right?
yeah,
As I was talking to someone, who's deep in this space, that gentleman was telling me that the problem with availability of GPUs today is not anything but power, right? I mean, there is literally no power available in the right sort of capital structure to kind of go make this happen and produce more GPUs. While that's an interesting posture, and I don't know if that's 100% true or not, but these are limits around physics that you will hit. And who are the companies that might be in the best position to solve these kind of problems are the ones that have deep pockets. So it's not that everything, like you said, is immediate commodity, but I think the question that we should be asking ourselves is what happens in the fullness of time? Like what happens in the fullness of time when it comes to these things being available for everybody? How do people create unique competitive advantages in the ecosystem so that they're protected as an enterprise?
yeah. And I think the modalities can also be rethought, right? Like, should we even like copy AI or Jasper AI? Should the editor look like this when everything is being suggested by AI, or like do we have better forms? And you can like extrapolate that idea across all products where you want to put AI, right? So I think you'll see some new ground up ideas, like what was not possible before, essentially, that we'll see. But talking about like OpenAI and OpenAI's collaboration with Microsoft, I'm curious, like, how do you think about that collaboration? Like, it's part investment, part partnership, and this trend that has resulted because Microsoft partnered with OpenAI, now Google partnered with some other company, Amazon is partnering with the other company. Like, how do you see that collaboration?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to tell from the outside, but I think, Microsoft has done a phenomenal job in sort of bringing AI to the world in partnership with OpenAI, right? I mean, if you look at the Azure Open AI, service that's going to be made available, like I'm sure enterprises are flocking to Azure and saying, hey, look, how can I retire my credits against this? How can I get early access? How can I use it? And I think, kudos to Satya and the team for an amazing sort of vision on what this might mean for the world. And I think it's given Microsoft, I would say, a unique advantage to begin with, straight out of the gate. I mean, if you look at the innovations that they showcased working on Bing or integrating it with the productivity suite and Office, I think it's just like sort of giving them a boost and a shot in the arm. Now the question becomes is how relevant is that going to be in the fullness of time, right? And how sustained that is going to be in terms of driving usage and adoption and capturing customer value, right? But I think the tech is amazing. The innovation is fast paced, and in the last like 6 weeks, we've seen so much happen in the ecosystem in the world that the way we interact with technology is going to completely and fundamentally change. And there's no running away from that. So I think there's an early advantage, and but there are other companies that are big and huge and massive, and they've got this innovative DNA. I mean, look, I couldn't imagine an Amazon or Google not focusing on this. I'm sure they are. I think it's a matter of time as to what they come up with and how they position themselves. I mean, if you think of it, Google sitting on this brilliant asset called YouTube, and from a video perspective, like if there's anybody in the best position to sort of go create like an amazing video model, it's probably Google. And I think it's worth watching this space closely to see what announcements get made over the next 6 to 8 weeks, to see how people are integrating these AI capabilities naturally into their products and meeting users where they are.
Do you think, I mean, I think we've seen like a open letter being signed to stop all AI advancement for like 6 months. I think Elon Musk signed it. What do you think about that whole, we should take a step back in terms of developing more powerful models?
I am not so sure which way I stand on that, right? Because the innovator in me says, hey, why if there's innovation happening, what are we trying to solve for when it comes to pause these kind of things, right? Like, is it Is it
But I
gone?
guess the fear is like, we are creating a AGI that's against humanity, right?
I mean, look, yeah, there's always been these movies around like, sci-fi capabilities where the robots turn against you and, they've got enough capability and all that. Look, I mean, I appreciate the thinking and I appreciate, what the concern is. But at the end of the day, I think any innovation that you work on could be detrimental to society. And I think we've got to be careful and we've got to be aware and we've got to sort of think through hey, what this might mean. But I don't know if a 6 month pause really fixes that. I think the question is like, what are the right levels of guardrails that we put in place in order to make sure that we are not sort of using these technologies against the core premise of humanity. I don't know if the 6 month pause is the right answer or if thinking through the guardrails is the right answer. I think it's somewhere in between. But I'm not so sure on like the pause kind of solving it because you might get into an analysis paralysis thing, right? And it's very hard to say, hey, nobody go focus on this thing for the next 6 months. I mean, that's just not going to happen.
Do you think LLMs are like human brains?
Uh, I'm not so sure. I mean, I think the human brain aspect of it is slightly different, right? I mean, I look at it as LLMs are trained on the data that we provide them, right? So what's the data that is getting provided to them? And does that have the capability of sort of emulating, like I say, like the neuron connections in your brain, right? I'm not a scientist in embedded in deep science to say, hey, where does that land? But at the end of the day, is it powerful tech? Yeah, it's amazing tech. And can it sort of get close to capabilities? Yes. But then there's also the challenges that we hear around model hallucination, right? I think someone said it really, really well. Like, hey, an LLM kind of is like a friend you go hang out with, right? Like you ask the friend a question, the friend gives you a question, but sometimes the friend is wrong. Like, what do you do then? Like you apply your own intelligence and your own best judgment to avoid that hallucination effect. So do we think that we can trust it blindly yet? I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, if I'm writing a blog, I still am going to go proofread it. I'm going to go see what the output is, and is it contextually relevant? Does it get me 80% there? Sure.
Yeah. I think it's some type of intelligence. I don't think it's human intelligence. It's a different type of intelligence, but nevertheless useful one. So we're almost at the end of our conversations, and I ask pretty much all my guests this question: like, what your information diet is? Like, what are the things that you consume on a day-to-day basis that sort of inform your worldview?
I mean, outside of the regular, the tech crunches, the journals, the research papers coming out of universities that I love to read, I think those are generally the way how I'm trying to keep relevant, at least in the spaces that I'm interested in. Market maps, like looking at different perspectives, point of views, blogs. I mean, the usual stuff. I am, I tend to also tap into another resource that I think is incredibly valuable is just humans. And I think when you talk to people who are domain experts, you get a lot more depth and you get a lot more qualitative insight that you otherwise could sometimes miss in a quantitative or reading a paper kind of thing, right? When I'm reading a paper or if I'm reading an article, if I have questions, who do I ask those questions to, right? I think it just makes it incredibly hard. But I love the interactiveness of talking to people who are depth experts, for talking to people who spend years and careers building in researching a space, because I can truly get to the five whys of my questioning, right? And that to me is an incredible resource more than anything else. And so, to your point, like, do I feel that LLMs can do that? Maybe not. Can humans do that? I think so. And so I think there is that level of depth and that enrichment of dialogue that I really crave for. So, I tend to spend a lot of my time talking to people and learning from them.
Do you have like a specific approach, or like do you like make it a habit of reaching out to people on a consistent basis? Like, how do you do that?
I'm kind of, I like to say that I'm an extrovert by nature, and so it's natural to me to sort of reach out and say hello and maybe even pick somebody's brain on it. But of course, like Madrona is amazing, and we've got a powerful network of people in our circle that we often reach out to, and these are people who've spent their careers doing certain things, and so talking to them and getting access to them is is amazing. And I've been in the area for 20 years, 25 plus years, spent 18 at Microsoft, and over a period of time have my own network of folks that I call upon and often talk to and connect up with. And so it's pretty natural, and LinkedIn is powerful. I love the capability of writing someone a message and saying, hey, I'd love to pick your brain for 30 minutes. And people are very generous, and I appreciate that. By that even when I reach out and have a question, like, they're pretty generous with their time and offering up advice, and that's just an amazing power of the ecosystem.
Awesome. I think that's a good note to end the conversation. Aseem, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you, Natraj.